can AI be used to understand vulnerability? Or can AI understand vulnerability, full stop?
So it's a very broad question, and like you said, very loaded. So to narrow it down a little bit, I think the short answer is no, but it can assist in, at least in my opinion, it can assist. So it can pick up on specific identifiers. And then when we think about how we might identify vulnerability from a customer, I tend to look at it in the spoken and the unspoken. So the spoken being in a conversation and whatever channel that happens to be, so voice, text-based, the AI can analyze language and pick up on what's being said within that in terms of the topics that they're talking about, but also the way they frame the language as well. And on the unspoken side, you've got more of their behaviours. So what's happening behind the scenes. So in a financial institution, there's tons of behavioural metrics, scores, flags, indicators. They can all be used to give or to paint a picture of potential vulnerability or predict a vulnerable status. If you think about all of the kind of propensity modelling that happens now to predict propensity to pay, propensity to fall into debt, to go to late stage delinquency, all of those models could be adapted in some form to help be a predictor of vulnerability, or indeed to identify that a customer is now in a vulnerable state of some form. And where AI can play a part in that is to scale it up and also bring in additional variables outside of just the financial metrics to help paint a larger and broader picture of what that vulnerability is and how potentially the organisation needs to support that customer specifically.
Great answer. Yeah.
I would agree with that. So I don't think AI can understand or define vulnerability. I think it's far too broad. It's a spectrum of different needs that customers have that can change all the time. So people can be, can experience vulnerability at lots of different stages in their life. You can be temporarily vulnerable, and you don't have to go very far to find someone who would identify as having had a vulnerability characteristic in the past. So I'm very excited about how it can enhance what our advisors are doing. So it is absolutely down to the human to make a decision and to make that judgment call. But in a sort of busy advice call where there's lots going on, we're taking a lot of information from the customer, we're trying to listen to a lot of information and get advice across at the same time. Any kind of prompting or support that we can give an advisor during a call will be hugely valuable. So even if it's just pause here, check for understanding. You've gone through a particularly complicated part of the journey, and then the bit that really does excite me is that on being able to scale that up and look at trends. If we can identify trends, if we can find cohorts of customers that are experiencing specific types of vulnerabilities, then we can design journeys around that, and we can rather than being reactive, we can be quite a lot more proactive about how do we support that customer and meet their needs.
This is absolutely fascinating. So I'm sat here listening to various approaches and potential use cases that AI can be deployed to support very broadly a vulnerable landscape. So I've heard first line real-time support and prompting. That's a very clear use case of bringing in some form of tech which will help lighten an agent's cognitive load so that they can then say, in the event that this has been expressed, do the following thing. So that's like an agent response reaction type scenario. I've heard, how can we develop machine learning AI-based propensity models that allow us to help simulate conversations and react to conversations? But I've also heard, how do I interrogate big data to look at trends and then come up with process improvement? So there's a lot that we could dive into, and this is where my brain just starts whirling, because we have somebody who works in a landscape of operations which supports a customer base which is by its nature vulnerable. So how do you go about identifying where all of your customers are vulnerable, who is considered to be, I have a level 1 vulnerability, I have a level 2 vulnerability, and where do you focus what is in effect a finite amount of resources to have the most impact on the people who are the most needy.
So I think that's another dynamic of a use case that we require AI for. So we need to take our people away from doing manual processes, and we can talk later, I guess, about how AI can support automation of manual tasks and things. We have to prioritise all the time. So we want to, first of all, we need to make sure that our journeys are designed in the right way, and that we give low friction touch points to our customers when they need them the most. We have to really listen to what the customer says, and I think that's where the human judgment comes into this. We some customers, are happy for us to know their vulnerabilities. Some find it more difficult to talk about, and then we have to, look for cues and try to respond to those customers in different ways. So at MoneyPlus, we've got a specialist care team, for example, that's in place for customers who, we believe are particularly vulnerable and require that quite significant level of support, versus a customer who might want to communicate with us via digital channels rather than over the phone, speaking to a person. So it's a huge balancing act.
Yeah.
But at the centre of it has to be every customer that we touch base with. We have to consider their individual needs and make the best possible decisions that we can. And I think that AI can be a tool to support that.
Definitely. So you're trying to achieve more, so leveraging, so I'm hearing we want to be able to leverage some form of advanced tech to be able to assist our workforce to achieve the best outcomes for our customers, and then access, if necessary, a specialist support team in the background which can help the more extreme vulnerable amongst your clients. So when you talk about customer journeys, are you also looking at the internal touch points and friction points to access these systems and these processes that you have to support vulnerability? Because you've got frontline vulnerability I've identified. Now I know that this person needs the extra support. You mentioned frictionless. So helping deliver that early warning system. But then in MoneyPlus, how are you identifying the vulnerability of those support systems? So you might have, for example, I'm now moving you into hypercare, but then the internal steps to achieve the results of giving that person support, how are you identifying what areas of vulnerability you as a business, or blockers are you as a business putting in place, which means this process isn't working because it's difficult to access. This process isn't working because it involves so many steps. And it's like those secondary actions that stem from, I've identified it, you're now in the process, but potentially you're holding yourself back. Now, have you considered using AI to identify how to declutter process, for example?
Absolutely. So if you look at this through a consumer duty lens, one of the main points there is that our products and services are designed in a way that meets our customers' needs. Whenever this is where we're saying about trends, like wherever we identify a trend, we want to look at that and look at how we can simplify processes, how we can make services more accessible to customers. But we're very open-minded to using AI for process improvement and things like that. That, in my opinion, would probably be the safest place to start, is with some of those, lower risk areas where we've got our people in the loop, ensuring this kind of oversight.
That's fascinating. You use the word risk. So I use ChatGPT on a daily basis, not only to help augment my work, because it's a companion, and it's a clever companion. And I use it in my private life. So my avatar, for example, on Teams is the AI-generated version of me. It just makes me look better.
No.
Yes.
I don't believe it.
Yes. But one thing that it does do very well is it'll take data sets and it'll produce a form. So you've got very simple AI-powered tools that can help with form generation, form completion, robotic process automation. That's been around for 10 years. but with an AI slant on it, information being gathered frontline by an agent, rather than them being distracted and saying, well, I've now got to go and complete this step. AI can say, well, grab that step, I'm now going to complete that back-end process for you, so you can focus on being more empathetic, on listening, because that process itself is distracting me from supporting my customer. So there's a very easy, accessible use of AI to help automate little bits of process, for example.
I mean,
That's quite low touch.
Yeah. So we talk about this kind of idea of a keyboardless agent. So an agent is just focused on the conversation. The AI is working alongside them. So as the conversation unfolds, the AI can be coaching, prompting. Maybe you need to ask this question, just check this kind of factor, but also completing the tasks in all the different applications the agent needs to access as that's going along. And the agent can just be in the loop to kind of confirm or discard a particular action that the AI is about to take, for example. So they literally are not kind of flipping between different tabs and filling in forms as the conversation is unfolding, which might take their attention away from the customer. They're just there to focus on the customer and the conversation that's happening in real time.
I think as well, bringing it back a little bit, so you alluded to it, Andrew, with the different labels for vulnerability, because on the previous podcast we spoke about the challenge in just literally defining vulnerability, and you basically mentioned like one person might be vulnerable one day but not the next, that kind of stuff. And with AI needing so much data to basically help it make a decision, is there a risk of over-labeling vulnerability? And how do we actually define that on an individual and case-by-case basis?
Yeah, so I very strongly feel that we shouldn't be using AI to label vulnerability. We've got guidance from the FCA on what vulnerability means. We've got company-level policies which should be relied upon. We have unbelievable rich data that's coming from our customers and feedback from our from our colleagues as well, so our frontline teams. And vulnerability can change, new characteristics can emerge. The pandemic's a great example of that. You know, we all started to experience different kind of living circumstances and difficulties, and you know, things like furlough, that those were emerging vulnerability characteristics that financial services businesses needed to be aware of. So I think, again, using AI to support us to identify, using it to support us to adapt and provide better services to customers and good outcomes for customers, absolutely, but very much keeping the human element of what is vulnerability, is this a vulnerability, you know, making those decisions, that should be down to policymakers, businesses, and that real collaboration of thought across a number of different stakeholders that are involved there.
Yeah, well, you kind of just mentioned that then, James, didn't you, in terms of if an agent's got 20 things that you need to do on a call, they might miss one specific cue, and having the AI in place might just pop up and give them a prompt to go back to it and pay a bit more attention to it, but not having it completely drive that conversation. So I think that's where the relationship between the two comes in.
Yeah, and so important. I also, that, you know, one thing that I'm very alert to is not becoming overly dependent upon it either. We very much need our employees to be skilled and understanding and empathetic. And what I've seen in other businesses is that scripts can become overly relied upon, and the person who is dealing with that script on a call isn't actually thinking or having a conversation with the customer. They're moving through steps. So I want helpful prompting, but I don't want to develop a scenario where there's an over-reliance on that prompting. Yeah. We've got to use AI for coaching, training.
You don't want to be AI-led, right?
No,
it needs to be human. It needs to be there to assist. Yeah, because the other thing is with the customer is once you identify that they may be in a vulnerable circumstance, understanding then what does that specific customer need, because I might be in a vulnerable circumstance, but I might not want any support. And I might find it offensive if you offered me support or to label me as vulnerable, versus someone who may want support but doesn't know how to ask for it. So how and to what level of touch do you offer support, and what does that look like as well? But then what happens when you are no longer in a vulnerable state and need to move out of that, and what does that look like? And do you have to be asked to say, I'm no longer vulnerable, please don't treat me this way anymore, kind of thing as well? So I think there's going through vulnerability and then coming out the other side, and what does that look like, and how do we identify that as well?
So the unspoken explicit consent, an agreement that vulnerability is there and I want your help, and then the resistance to help because they don't know that vulnerability is important. AI is not. You will have people that sit there and tell you AI can deploy and find those hidden vulnerabilities that people aren't prepared to talk about. And there are some very, very advanced AI emotional detection services out there which can help in very specific use cases. So healthcare support for diagnostics. There are businesses that actively employ very high specification AI models around emotional detection in voice. So if somebody's listening to me and they can hear I'm rasping and wheezing, even though I don't say I have an issue, they might say, well, you're breathing as if you've got the beginnings of a chest infection, for example. There are cues which my body is giving out, which can be detected. But if I'm looking at supporting, I want to pick up a point that you mentioned, that you don't want agents to be constrained by a script. You want AI to be almost sat there on their shoulder, just giving prompts and cues. How do you define the limit of intrusion for cognitive load? Right, so there are going to be a dozen different things that agents are going to have to do frontline when they're talking to a customer. I have to fill this form, I have to remember this, I have to remember that. And I don't want to miss things. If I have my little AI agent in the background going, oh, that's been mentioned, oh, that's been mentioned, where do you draw the line to say it has to intervene and say you haven't picked up on this? Because AI needs rules, it needs regulation, it needs framework, and it needs to be told, right, you can do this, you can do that. Otherwise it'll be like the middle child. It's really needy and it wants to be able to impress. You know, I've let it run loose on my data and it's going to come up with all sorts of things. But it's down to a business to define how far you let that assist. And have you considered frontline prompting use, for example? Say, if my agents are highly trained and they know what to look for, what's to say they are missing vulnerable cues? Why are you saying that might be the case? Have you, without exposing the business, but have you effectively felt that you're exposing yourself to missing these cues?
I think there's a few questions in there.
Yeah,
so
there's
let's,
lots.
Yeah,
so
it's all right. Let's so unpack them. I've worked in financial services for 20 years, and vulnerability isn't something new.
No.
And humans still are humans.
Yes.
So we're always going to miss things. So I do think there is absolutely a use case for that support. To your point around determining guardrails, it has to be designed with the frontline colleagues in mind, so they have to be part of that journey. I don't want to. What I want AI to do is limit stress, not increase stress. So it has to be gentle, helpful prompts at the right times, and then there's some things that probably do need to be dealt with on the call in the moment. And then there's other things that we can take away from that call and inform training needs and how we support and develop that individual advisor or teams or the full business where we see a particular trend. Yeah.
We've talked quite a bit as well about on-call support, but is there a really good use case around having digital and automated channels? Especially this might be the case for you, Christina, in a financial service, is if someone's in financial debt, a lot of the time they might be more comfortable sharing that with an automated AI than they would an actual person explaining that. So is that something else we need to be considering as well, creating these new channels for people to...
Yeah, so we've just recently launched an online journey for onboarding. So customers can come to us and receive that advice through digital means. Still quite early stages with that. You know, we're in regular contact with the FCA about how that's showing up and whether or not that's the right thing for us to be doing. We really believe that it is, and there's a few reasons for that. So one, people tend to think about how dire financial circumstances are in the middle of the night when they wake up worrying about them. And we don't have a 24-hour operation. I would love us to have a 24-hour operation so that we could be there at all times, but that, you know, that's not a viable option. So by putting in place this digital journey, at first we opened it up during, you know, out of office hours, and what we did see was customers engaging with us at that point in time when they're probably feeling the most stressed. And that could be gathering information, it could be trying to get all of the way through and get advice from us and potentially even a solution from us. So that's one thing to consider. But one of the data points that's been really interesting to watch progress, and I do believe it will continue as we start to increase the volumes, is that we're seeing about 10% more customers that disclose a vulnerability digitally than do it over the phone with an advisor.
Wow.
And that's just that is one journey, and it's quite a significant journey. It's the beginning of the relationship with Money Plus. But as we design more digital touch points, absolutely we need to give customers access to low stress, low pressure environments where they can be open with us and tell us what they need. And some, to your point before, some customers are really happy to disclose the vulnerability. They recognise immediately that we're going to be able to make some changes to how we work with them, and that's great. Other customers find it really, really difficult, and they might see disclosing their vulnerability as a barrier to a service, which of course isn't the case. That's quite the opposite of what we're trying to do by understanding vulnerability. But making it as easy for them as possible, and everyone's different. Like I would be quite happy, honestly speaking, about my vulnerabilities. I think at this point in my life, my 23-year-old and my 19-year-old son would do nothing more than pop it in a message. You know, it's everybody's different. We're dealing with different types of vulnerabilities, and some are easy to talk about than others as well. So that's another spectrum to consider.
So it's meeting this really, I think you raise a really fascinating point, one about almost the ability to be almost anonymous and tell a bot, for example, or a digital journey, my issues, rather than actually disclosing to a person, has shown an increase in vulnerability disclosure, which is, I think, absolutely fascinating, and it's really interesting. But then meeting customers where they are, you said, like, in the middle of the night, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be stressed and worried. That's when I feel the most vulnerable, and then potentially reach out for support. So one area that we see developing at pace, because AI runs at the most alarming rate, developmental-wise and product-wise, because there's lots of new developments in the market. But the ability for businesses to operate a 24/7 operation with ever-increasing, almost humanistic-like qualities that they can offer out to customers is a particularly good development, I think, on the use of AI. So there's a lot that you can discuss around that. And the people throw around the word, the buzzword at the moment is obviously agentic. And then the ability of agentic AI to help sort of rationalize and reason and flow and become more and more autonomous. I'd be really fascinated to understand how you're planning those journeys that you're offering out to customers, because AI has got the ability to actually react and respond in ways that isn't constrained by, we call it deterministic, right? So we have decided and determined that a journey should follow a certain pathway because we're designing it that way. AI doesn't necessarily need to respond in that fashion.
Yeah.
No, it can find, like water will find the best route, right?
Yeah,
if you allow AI access to tools and information, it will often respond in ways that is better for the customer because it's not constrained by our thinking, so to speak. So I'd be really keen to see how that develops within Money Plus, because that's a really exciting area to develop.
Yeah, I agree, but I think it's also an area where we've got to think about guardrails and
massively.
Be cautiously optimistic about things like that. But absolutely, do we want to make sure, as you said, that we can meet the customer where they are? Yeah. And anything that's going to allow us to do that, if we can get confident in that solution, and we can be confident that we're managing the risks in that solution appropriately, then that's something we're absolutely open to, and hopefully we start to look at over the next 12 months.
Yeah.
You teed up my next question really nicely there. I was
Go
going to
for
ask
it.
about setting up the guardrails, and James, I know we've spoken about this in the past, but especially if you're talking about something that's sensitive to maybe the customer that you're engaging with, how can you make sure that the AI is set up in a way, if it's an automated chatbot or something along those lines, to not say something that could be maybe insensitive or something along those lines, and if they're sharing private data, make sure that the actual end user trusts what they're engaging with?
Yeah, so there's a couple of bits there, and it ultimately will come down to prompting in a large amount of that. So on setting the tone for what the AI's objective has got to be, how it communicates, whether it matches the energy and tone of the customer, whether it has a specific brand tone, using the type of language that you want it to use with the customer. I think communication is a really interesting one, because particularly in financial services, there's lots of kind of legal legislative terms which no one knows what they mean, right? Not in plain English. So while there may be requirements to say and use those terms, there needs to be an ability for someone in plain English, or a system in plain English, to be able to kind of say what that actually means in your circumstances is this, this and this. And then going back to the guardrails, obviously giving it information which is pre-vetted, quality checked, is up to date, and how you have a process in place for taking out information which is expired. Any conflicting information, we see this as well. This probably goes back to any AI project when you begin, is making sure that you have good data, access to it, and processes as well. Making sure that is well defined before you kind of embark on any of this. So those are kind of like the guardrails, and then where you've got absolute requirements such as GDPR, for example, all that needs to be kind of baked in so it understands that it can't go beyond certain parameters. And then in terms of personal data, obviously understanding what models you're going to use, language models, and where do they sit. So whether you're hosting something yourself, whether you're using an instance of one of the big language models that are out there today, such as OpenAI, whether you're using their kind of version in your own kind of Microsoft Azure, for example, so that you know the data isn't going to go out to anywhere beyond where you're happy for it to go.
There's I completely agree. There's one other thing, and that is absolute transparency with the customer. This is what we're using your data for. This is how we're using your data. If that's not very clear to a customer from the outset, then I think we're potentially, we're straying into trust issues. So I think being very clear about your use cases, but then communicating those use cases really clearly. The communication point's a really good one, because we've recently spent quite, not a lot of time, but we spent time reviewing all of our customer communications, the terms and conditions, and making sure that they are in a clear and consistent language. And that's something we absolutely have used AI for, not on its own, with a human.
That's your knowledge base, isn't it? That's effectively the core brains of policy, procedure, and steps and processes that need to be robust and in place and clear, well written.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if it's AI using it or an agent accessing that, it needs to be navigable, it needs to be clear, it needs up to date, on point. And when I'm listening to the right considerations, it's got to be GDPR compliant, it needs to be hosted in the right area, it's got to be self-contained within a secure environment, and then the right language being used. AI is only as good, but you referenced the bot. A bot's answers and reactions are only as good as the information that's got available to be able to do it. And the big fear is, it's going to hallucinate and go off track. Well, no, you can tell it to only look at a certain place. How you respond in tone, be formal, be light-hearted, use this language, use that language. That's all within the gift of the business to decide how it actually responds. But the parameters and the information that's available to it to be able to feed back is entirely down to you as a business in your gift to be able to put that right. And what's particularly key for me, when we talk to businesses about, I want to be able to deploy the latest and the greatest, what flavour of AI do you want? It does come down to a fundamental, what shape is your knowledge in? How is that, where is that stored? Is it in good shape? Are your processes up to date? Because if you don't have if they're not accessible, they're not in a certain place, and it's accessible, for you to be able to point the AI to it, you run the risk of the project just not going forward because the knowledge isn't in the right shape. But that's a good place to start because the tech's there to be able to do what you want it to do. Now, one area or question that we get asked a lot is, well, is there an easy flavour of AI that we can deploy? Is there a beginner's AI that we can get access to? We've talked briefly, let's meet the customer where they are at X point in the night and let's gather information. That's beautiful. I love that. I do. But actually, we want to be able to do something which is lower risk, easier for us to define, and it's been around for a while, but it's the auto-summarization of phone calls. Yeah, auto-summary.
Yeah.
Hello, nice, easy, light use case of AI. Take all of the things that an LLM does well, which is give me a transcript, tell it what you want out of that transcript, summarize it and present it back. Yep. That's a very nice introduction to AI to a business, which is a little bit more friendly, a little bit less risk, and then allows you to start to play with the concepts of what an LLM can do, So for us, when we talk to business, or for me when I talk to business, it's like we've got the future state, great, but where are you on your journey of actually putting this into place? Because you've got IT&C questions to go through. You've got your ethical committees that you need to consider. We've talked about LLMs. Right? What are these language models trained on? What type of data have they got? Do I run the risk of hallucination? Is it going to take my data and manipulate it and do something I don't want? All of those things need to be answered. But you've got to get your foot in the door somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you've called that out because that is the first use case that we want to do. Absolutely, it's called summarisation, and the reason for that is, like you say, it's fairly low risk, as long as we've got agents with eyes on and making sure that information that it's captured is correct and it's accurate. But also when you think about this from an employee's perspective, we very much want to position this as something that assists them, not that replaces what they're doing.
Augment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Does that play part in, because one thing that tends to be overlooked in this topic as well is agent vulnerability. So in some industries more than others, but if an agent's up for one call to the next and they're all quite distressing calls, then that's going to take a toll on them. So if we've got something like auto summary, does that support with them in terms of giving them a bit more time before the next call? It can flag something that might have happened on that call to give them some extra support, something along those lines.
I'm going to turn this one over to you, actually.
That's where it's
huge topic.
That's where I'm hoping that AI can give us something in the on-call setting rather than the post-call setting. So naturally we speak to customers who are in really distressing circumstances on some occasions, and we have managers and specialist advisors that have been trained to jump on a call if that's happening. And in the old world, it's put your hand up, make a commotion. I need some help. Not quite that dramatic at the moment. We do have a way of alerting people. But rather than it being that advisor making the decision that they need to alert someone, if there are some keywords, for example, that the call listening can pick out, those keywords can alert us to at least go and check in. And I'm very much looking forward to the CCAS technology giving us the ability to get on a call with a customer, with an advisor, and just listen, take over a call if we need to, because I marvel at my teams every day. They the emotional burden that they sometimes can take on, anything that we can give them to support them in that moment is just, it's like gold.
That does kind of come back to what we were saying before about the customer might not necessarily want to label themselves as vulnerable. And if an agent's dealing with a distressing call, they might not necessarily want to ask for help. So if you've got something that's pinpointing a difficult conversation for them, it takes the burden off them to then raise a hand.
I think it's not just, I'm going to jump on this a little bit because this is an area I've been forget AI for the moment, but the idea of an agent having to repeatedly listen to and support people who have particular needs, it can be very draining. I worked in a call centre once at the beginning of my career, and there's a lot of rinse and repeat. Right, so I take a call, I've got a little bit of time, I take another call, a little bit of time. So if I'm in an environment where nearly all of the calls that I'm taking are potentially distressing, because you get some industries where that it takes a toll. It does. So how, as a business, can I support that agent and then recognise the effective needs of that agent, what warning signs are there available? And there are tools out there which have been out there for a while that allow you to effectively measure and gauge how an agent is doing. Sentiment, for example, is a classic. It's the granddaddy of AI models. It really is, right? Sentiment. And which can be measured in both channels, right? So I've got client sentiment, agent sentiment. But then I've got my behavioural skills as well. You know, I've got empathy, for example, which again has been measured effectively from a predictive behavioural model for at least 3 to 4 years that I'm aware of. Right? So I've got empathy, I've got sentiment, which I can flow through all of my conversations, and I can see, well, if at the beginning of a week, an agent, just hypothetical, right? Beginning of a week, an agent's sentiment was reasonably high, so they're reacting quite positively, and their empathy was registering high. If I'm seeing that deteriorate, the agent's empathy, their responses are becoming less empathetic, and the sentiment behind their conversation is lowering, that is a really reliable indicator, warning flag to me as a business to say, I need to step in. Now, if you want to talk about trends, like there's in the moment, I'm going to help you, but the long-term support for agents, for the business to say, I can see this has been grueling, the signs are there to say I need to step in and give you a bit of breathing space. Those tools exist, they do, and I think they're very valuable, because often when we talk about vulnerability, we don't talk about the vulnerability of agents, because they're the ones carrying the burden oftentimes.
You're right, and if they, if they're not getting that support, then they can lose their empathy, and it just becomes, like you say, a machine over and over, and then we lose the effectiveness.
Yeah. And we as a business take that really seriously. I mean, we've got an in-house counsellor, for example. So we've thought about how we can support our advisors on and off the call. But you're right. If we can tap into ways to identify that, but equally it's the same with customers, because some of our advisors will say, no, I'm fine. Yeah. They want to deal with it themselves. They have their own coping mechanisms, and then others are very open to different ways of help as well. So again, that's about respect. It's about trust. It's about people understanding how we're using the data, because I think just as equally as we need to consider the customer's awareness of the use of data and the consent, we need to have an awareness of our employees need to have an awareness of how we're going to use data for support services to them as well. And
it's the transparency, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so a healthy, open, transparent business environment where your customers get the support that they need and your agents get the support that they need if and when they need it, is vital. You've got, we touched very briefly on on-call support, right? So something needs to happen. Then you've got the post-call environment, which is incredibly rich to be able to mine and use. Touches a little bit now on the original point that you made, which was, how can I use data to build behavioural models and predictive analysis? Can I use AI to farm data to show me patterns? That's one aspect of it. Of course you can. Yeah, that's easy. We've touched on Microsoft Azure and get LLMs to do it. It's all available. It's all there. The trick or the key that we're finding as businesses are going on that journey themselves is developing the internal skills, because it is a new world for a skill deployment perspective to get the most. We mentioned prompts and prompting, right? There's an art to doing it. There is. And if you put rubbish in, you get rubbish out.
Yeah.
There's something that we're missing here, which underpins the whole thing, is the quality of the transcript that is produced off the call. So as good as your AI is, if it's not able to read what's in front of it, it's not going to give you particularly good results. So is your business vulnerable from a technological or a technology perspective, and do they have the right tools in place to fundamentally allow the AI to do its work? And transcript quality is huge. You know, if my transcripts aren't very good and I've got gaps, you don't want AI filling them in. It will if you let it, because it will.
Yeah.
And I've seen it. Yeah, I've worked with insurers, and they're like, blah, 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 we want the AI to grab, because they want to fill out forms, they want the task assist, I want it to grab it. Somebody has said, oh, I'm driving a Togo Ega, and it comes up with Toyota Igo. So the AI has interpreted that and given its own spin on it. Contextually, it's right. But that's the AI interpreting what that transcript said.
Yeah.
And it gets really dangerous if we're going down the vulnerability route, because this is something which is incredibly sensitive. So for me, part of the let's go on an AI journey does involve, well, what have you got from a transcription perspective, speech to text? What engine are you using? What's the reliability? What's the readability? What's the word error rate? You know, is it fit for purpose? But otherwise, you're building on shaky foundations.
Yeah.
Well, just sticking on that, and we've talked a lot about so James, you branded it a while back as like on-call and off-call vulnerability support. We've talked a lot about the on-call support. What are some of the use cases, and have you got any examples of off-call vulnerability support and how that's helping people move from more of a reactive vulnerability and even compliance model to a preventative strategy?
Preventative or proactive, and I think it comes back down to the communication piece. So how do you broach the subject of potential vulnerability, or we think you might be in a vulnerable set of circumstances or a vulnerable state, without overtly kind of saying you're vulnerable because I say you are. So is it something where we think, well, some indicators have come through, we think this customer may be in a vulnerable circumstance, let's use that to proactively send them something which says, you know, just to let you know, we're always here to help. We offer these services. Don't forget to check out, and it might be just simple as signposting to a repository on the website or to a debt charity, for example. Something which is not saying you're vulnerable, therefore you need to do this. It's just, we're always here to help. We're here to listen. These are the services that we offer. There you go. Do with it what you will at this point. Something like that, for example. Yeah.
And that then comes down to, so the idea of being able to offer proactive outreach. It's all perfectly within the realms of what tech can do. But if you're going to create a journey and you want to be able to support preemptively, the challenge that exists is, what data are you using to train out to be able to create that? So data repositories and having systems in place, or single sources of truth in place, to be able to put all of your data so that you can then let AI work on some predictive modeling, for example, and come up with formula and sort of triggers and way of doing things. We find, or I'm finding, that there's a definite will in the market at the moment from businesses to be able to achieve certain things. They're restrained by having multiple siloed systems with data sitting in various different points that don't talk to each other. So, and as I mentioned, transcripts, right? If I've got poor quality transcripts, I'm going to immediately be on the back foot as far as AI goes. If my data is spread out through multiple different systems and isn't accessible, how can I possibly create an accurate journey based on behaviors and triggers if I can't see them? So having all of that data in a single certain point is really important. When you're engaging on the subject of AI, the big picture around an actual business needs to involve, well, I'm bringing in IT, I'm bringing in our database guys, I'm bringing in the infrastructure guys, I'm bringing in operations, I've got some form of central guidance, I've got my risk over here, I've got my ethics people there. Everybody has to be on a almost unified pathway to say, this is where we're going, this is what we're trying to get to. Let's actually have a project plan in place to make sure we achieve certain milestones so that we can unlock the potential that AI will give us. Because I've seen agentic AI, I've seen do some amazing stuff. But if it's built on shaky foundations, it won't give you what you need. So
that's like the oldest the oldest financial services technology problem in the book, isn't it?
The financial services, it runs on Cobalt. But it works.
Well,
in the 60s.
It works. No one knows how, and no one dares touch it.
Exactly.
Don't go too close to it.
I think my last question really is then how, in a contact centre where you're measuring basically everything, length of call, first call resolution, every kind of engagement metric, are we measuring vulnerability support? And if so, how? And how is that interact or relating to general performance metrics? Is it baked into that as well, or?
So I think from a Money Plus perspective, and I would hope most financial services, we've been given really clear steer from our regulator, and it's positive shift in the right direction. We're measuring customer outcomes. That's ultimately what we care about. And that directly can sometimes work against trying to drive your average handling time down, because we might have a particularly vulnerable customer who needs longer on the phone with us because we need to take time to explain things or give them more time to think and more space to ask questions. It's not, it's a balance, but it's not a compromise. We have to put the customer outcome at the heart of what we're doing, and that again is why we don't just have one customer journey. We have kind of this a customer journey that has to be adaptable to different needs. So are KPIs, are other operational KPIs and performance KPIs important? Absolutely they are, because we need to continue to run a business and provide the service that we provide to our customers. But we have to make sure that at every step we're challenging ourselves on, is what we're doing delivering the right outcome for the customer? And if it's not, then what can we do differently? It's not either or. We've got to have an eye on both.
You also touched on something really fundamental here. So the FCA is, you operate in a regulated environment.
Yes.
You do. And there are other industries that operate in regulated environments. That regulator has certain powers to be able to turn up to a business and say, you have failed in a thing, I am going to issue some form of penalty.
Yeah.
And some of those penalties can be quite large. So there is not only it sounds ridiculous, but if we put the ethical considerations of consumer duty aside and wanting to do right by our customers, there is the financial compelling nature of getting it wrong to consider. And part of what I see as being fundamentally important in the deployment of AI is, one, that it is transparently done, but two, it's auditable. So if in the event that something happens whereby, rightly or wrongly, a customer feels aggrieved or not supported, you're able to document, audit and show that you as a business have done everything in your power to be able to treat that customer humanely, fairly and correctly, according to the regulator's view. And the conversations that you and I have had so far, it's you're working with the FCA, you're very transparent with the detail about where you're going and what you're doing. I'm hoping that any tools that you deploy give you that level of confidence in their reporting ability and output to say to the FCA, look, here's proof. This happened, I can show it, this is the support, and here is the audit trail that supports us as a business and makes us actually less of a risk to internal audit and interrogation. And that's really key, because we've touched, for example, on the use of Azure LLM. I'm engaged with a business who are doing all sorts of wonderful things with Azure and their LLM at Microsoft, and love it. It's brilliant. I've asked, in relation to the work that they're doing, can you show this? It's like, oh, no. Okay. So when you're assessing the ability to be able to deploy tools, having the internal audit data points is really important.
And also the resources who understand those data points. So we produce consumer duty metrics every month that are discussed right from our board level through our exco and with our teams. So we're constantly measuring, and we're also looking for new measures that give us indications that we're doing well, or we've got an area that we need to adapt things to. But equally, we've recently put in place a new sort of operational structure where we've got product ownership. So two product owners who, my message to them every day is to be completely mission orientated from the second a customer thinks they might want to contact a company like Money Plus to the minute they've closed their plan. Like, how do we get that journey right for those customers? So it's not just having that data and understanding of that data is what you do with it then.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so insight's really, really good, but it's the
it's what you do.
action and turn it into something operational.
Yeah.
Is it nice to have? Here's a nice dashboard I can see. Well, what are you doing with it?
Yeah.
That's the closing that loop, which is particularly key. You've mentioned as well, briefly, this is an area which I'm fascinated to get your viewpoint on. So the training and the coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, currently, training and coaching tends to be quite manually produced.
Yes.
It does. I mean, it's quite resource intensive. Do you see an area where AI could actually take on that role as a avatar trainer?
It's the same answer to every question, really, but take on the role, no. Augment the role, absolutely. So we have an in-house learning and development team. And if I threw everything that I would want to be training and coaching and, even just keeping up with changes in regulation, changing in customer behaviour, it would be more than a full-time job for anyone. So it's how do we use AI to support them, but not only them, managers as well. So managers are listening to calls every day, providing coaching, providing feedback, any support that we can give either the employee sort of in the moment, coaching in the moment when they're coming off a call, think about this next time. I'm fine with that, but more so I would like our managers, the coaches, to be informed, to be given suggestions, and prompted and guided towards how to have good coaching interventions with their team.
Yeah, and it's that driving. It's the augmentation of their skill for them to be able to deliver more quality focused coaching in a more not condensed fashion, but do more of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because what I've found historically is the will of a business is, well, we want to coach more, but the efforts that you have to go to be able to find what to coach and then create plans, etc., means that 60% of your time is spent on planning, prep and admin to be able to deliver a coaching session. You want to be able to flip that around, don't you?
Yeah, I'm prioritising what areas you focus on and making sure that they're aligned with your strategy, with consumer duty outcomes, making sure that we're concentrating our coaching effort in the right places and picking up on the right things.